Jill Shalvis is a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author who has written more than 50 acclaimed award-winning romance novels. She's a three-time winner of the National Reader's Choice Award and has been nominated for the RITA Award and for Romantic Times Career Achievement Award. Her latest novel, The Family You Make, will be released on Tuesday, January 11th. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Jill Shalvis.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Jill, I always like to say that this show is about uncorking the stories behind the stories. So I'm curious, where does your story as a writer begin?
My mom used to say I could make up stories before I could hold a pencil. So apparently it came from my very early ability to lie.
So do you remember any of those early stories that you were making up for your mother back in so long ago?
I don't remember this. This was something that was told to me. Apparently I used crayons on the wall. And when she asked me who had done it, I told her Batman, because to me, Batman was real. So it seemed like a conceivable cover story. I had no idea that was my first big lie.
Why not? I mean, why wouldn't the Dark Knight come in and just kind of color all over your mom's walls? It just makes perfect sense. Oh my God, that's funny. Now, what Batman were you kind of referring to back in those days? Did you?
I mean, we know this was in the Ice Age, right? Or before the Ice Age even. So I don't even know where that came from. But I continued to tell stories. I still love to tell stories. I mean, it's really nice that they pay me to make shit up for a living. You might have to cut that. Sorry.
No, this is we can say whatever you want to say. There's no restrictions on language here. You can say shit, fuck, damn, whatever. I like to say, George Carlin talks about the 7 dirty words, and Mike Carlin can talk about them as well. So
okay, that's good to know. I always forget to remind myself not to swear like a sailor on these things.
No. I just want you to be yourself. So when did you get the sense that you could make a career out of making up stories and for a living?
That came much, much later. I went to college as a journalism major at Cal State Northridge, and I quickly learned that I was not going to be the girl they put in front of the camera with a microphone. So I was writing stories for those people, and I kept embellishing the stories, and my professors kept giving me bad grades, and I would say, what am I doing wrong? And they would say the same thing my mother used to say, you're lying, like you can't do that in nonfiction. So that's when I realized I had a taste for stories. I finally realized, okay, maybe there's something to this. Supposed to be in fiction, not nonfiction. So that's when I first started writing back in the day. And I wrote a lot of short stories, but there wasn't a lot of money in that. And so I was working by day as a full charge bookkeeper. And then at night I would write, and that hurt my brain. Two very sides of the brain. But it was a long, long time before I ever submitted a book. It was years. I think I was 30 even mid-30s before I figured out I want to make a career out of this.
Wow. So up until that time, were you always working as a bookkeeper, or did you branch out from that and do anything creative before you started writing for a living?
I was always writing, but it was journals and short stories while working as a full charge bookkeeper. And then I got pregnant, and I was low man on the totem pole. So I got let go while I was pregnant. And I thought, I don't want to ever go back to that job, because I could spend my days writing. And so that's what I did. And I was one of the very few lucky ones that I sold almost right away. So almost from the time I decided to be a fiction writer, I was able to sell. And I started off writing very small category romances for Harlequin and Silhouette back in the day. That was my bread and butter, the kind of genre, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl. And I loved it. I was in heaven doing that and staying home with my babies. So that was awesome.
Wow. So
it was like a training ground for me, actually.
In what ways was it a training ground?
Because those stories, even though they're short and they seem so simple, they're really hard to tell. You have a certain amount of words, you have a formula you have to do, and yet you have to make it different enough that readers want to read you. And so it was a challenge, and it really taught me how to write a tight story. It taught me a lot about how to get characterization across very quickly from the beginning, and how to wrap things up without going on too long.
Yeah. So about how much time elapsed between when you decided, hey, I want to make a living doing this, and sort of crafting, your kind of first short story, and actually publishing it?
My first book came out, I think, in 1999, 98 maybe. And so that was probably I mean, like I said, I got lucky. So when I got laid off, when I was pregnant, that's when I went from writing short stories to writing myself a full-length novel. I'd been reading romance for years. In fact, when I was in high school, I used to have to walk home, and it was a long walk, like a couple of miles, and halfway home was a library. And I would go inside the library. I'd go into the way back where they had uncategorized romance novels by the hundreds on these racks. And I would sit in the beanbag chair, and I would get out my chemistry book, and I'd put one of those romances in front of my chemistry book, and I would be reading romances to my heart's content rather than doing my homework. I mean, I didn't just get my sexual education out of those naughty historicals. I actually learned how to tell a story. You know, there's turning points and there's drama, and how to come to a Black moment and how to resolve those Black moments. And so it was awesome. I mean, I didn't do very well in science those years, but I really did good in English.
Well, it seems like you were reading about chemistry, but just a different type of chemistry.
Yes, very different, very different. And so it was then that I kind of got this yearning to do more and bigger stories, but it was many, many years before I actually got to it.
Well, what do you suppose drove you to romance as a genre?
It had been what I'd been reading mostly. Actually, when I first wrote my first, I shouldn't say that, because I was also reading suspense and thrillers and autobiographies. I mean, I'd read a back of a cereal box, you know, I'll read the TV guide, I'll read anything. So when I started writing my book, I didn't really understand. I hadn't started doing the category novels yet, the category romances. So I didn't really understand genre. So I wrote my first book and I thought it was a suspense. And then when the editor called and said, we want to buy your book, but we need you to add some more romance to it. Like it's hinted at, but we need you to make it more because we're going to sell it as a romantic suspense. And that's when I first realized, okay, now there's a genre, and if I sell it, like I have to really know what I'm selling. So then I started reading with a different eye, an eye for the actual genre.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned that kind of being lucky, and things kind of happening fast for you. And that's sort of, you know, it's sort of the exception rather than the rule, you know, in most of the conversations I have. You know, most people talk about, you know, querying a lot and taking a long time to find an agent and taking a long time to kind of find the right publisher. Why do you suppose it happened a little bit differently for you?
And I don't know that I would say quickly, because I had been telling stories for 10, 15 years up until that point and getting nowhere. I just happened to be writing in the wrong place. I was doing nonfiction things, or I was doing short stories, things that my writing wasn't naturally suited for. So when I finally figured out what it was, I felt like it had taken my whole lifetime to get there. It didn't feel like it happened fast. What did happen fast was that I was lucky enough to sell my first story my first novel once I had written it. But it took a lot of revisions because I didn't know what I was doing. I had to go back in and add the romance to it. And once I had done that, I realized that what I was reading mostly was what I wanted to write. It just seemed very natural to go. But then, to be honest, I stayed in category for another 8 or 10 years. And before I started writing the bigger stories. So it was years before I hit the New York Times, for instance. Nothing happened fast. It felt very slow.
Certainly. Well, talk to me about the family you make. I know it's part of a new series that you're writing. You know, tell me about, you know, about the genesis of this story, how it came to you, and why you felt like this was, you know, the time to write it.
Well, I'd always been fascinated. For me, I'm a TV girl, a movie girl. I'm very visual. So the meet cute was always super important to me. The premise is always super important to me, even though I think I'm more known for characters than I am for plot. That's true. I love the characters, but I also, it's very important to me when I start a story that I have a premise. So this premise had come to me a long time ago about two people stuck in some sort of situation where they were sure they were going to die. Because when you think you're going to die, that's when you know somebody. And it was just I just had this image of two people stuck alone, and there was going to be no way out. How would they behave? How would they act towards one another? And you really see someone's character when you're in that kind of situation. And then I wanted them to have maybe made a promise or given each other a secret, so that when, I don't think it's a spoiler for me to tell you they don't die in chapter 1, how do you then go on? You know, you've revealed yourself in a way that you probably never would have. So, and I kept going on and on with that premise. And finally it occurred to me that maybe these two people were on a gondola in the storm of a century, a blizzard of a century. This was way before it actually happened to us this last month. It might not have been so amusing to me to write if I hadn't gone through that. So they're here in this gondola. It's just the two of them. It's the end of the day. So she's the last employee to leave the resort. He's the last skier to leave the resort. And in front of them, the gondola goes down. The gondola in front of them goes down. And so they're pretty sure it's the end for them. Their gondola stops, it starts to spin, the wind's kicking up. And he calls his mom to say goodbye. But when he hears her voice, he can't do it to her. So he tells her, I just want you to know the one thing that she's always wanted for him was to be in love. I just want you to know I'm in love and I can't wait for you to meet her and I'm happy. And then he loses his power and Wi-Fi and the phone is cut off and then they don't die. And then he has to produce this love of his life for his mom. And so that's the premise that I had in my head for a long time. And I was working it while I was writing other stories. And finally I got to write it. And I started it as a new series. And this Tahoe series, I had this idea that maybe I should be writing where I live because it's so great. So I started this new series called Sunrise Cove. And so that's the opening book in the series.
Wow. 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 So I mean, I'm sure you could take that in so many different directions, but I mean, just the premise of kind of sitting down next to somebody and thinking you're going to die, really kind of captures me because I travel a lot for my day job, or I used to before this virus came around. And I tell you, one night I was flying back from, I think Bentonville, Arkansas, maybe, I can't remember, but we were flying back into New York in some really, really bad weather. And we couldn't see anything outside. Visibility was 0. And I was in one of these tiny little jets and we were bouncing up and down, like we were bluesing and gaining altitude. And I know that things are bad when the stewardess who was in the jump seat next to me asked me to hold her hand and if I remember the rosary. And I'm like, okay, if you're nervous, I should be nervous too. So I mean, we bonded in that moment. And but yeah, wow, what a premise, huh?
Yeah. So you lived, obviously.
I'm here to talk to you. So I did live. I took the next day off of work. When I landed, I was unshaken. My feet were very kind of, my legs were shaky on the ground. And I still had to get back from LaGuardia, in Queens to Connecticut. But yeah, it was one of those harrowing experiences. But yeah, it's that moment of vulnerability where she sat down and asked to hold my hand. I'll never forget that for the rest of my life. I mean, we didn't, she didn't call her mom and tell her that she found the love of her life or anything like that. But I don't think my wife would have been happy. But
well, there's the difference fiction and reality. But
that's
I'm
true.
glad you.
I'm me too. All right, so you're writing, so this series all takes place in sort of your home of Lake Tahoe. Have you been in Tahoe for a while, or?
Yeah, like 23 or 24 years. We came up here when we were youngsters, and then I had 3 babies under the age of 5, and I was a city girl. And this is like rugged mountains up here. We're in the Sierras, and this is no joke. I had never lived in the snow. I had only skied a few times. It's the only time I ever saw snow. And, they have like wolf spiders and bears and raccoons and wolves. And it's just crazy the things that we've had to learn in the 20 years we've lived here. But now I feel more like I'm a mountain girl than a city girl. I always, for years and years, I felt I was a city girl in this misplaced kind of place that just seems so crazy to me. And it's also a very small town here. And LA is this huge town where you're anonymous wherever you go, like no one ever knows you. And here you go to the grocery store and you see your gynecologist in the first aisle, and you see the principal of your kid's school in the second aisle. And so it's just so different. And when I first moved here, I started writing small towns as the backdrop for my stories, because it was fascinating to me when all of the cliches we'd ever been told about small towns turned out to be true. And I just found the humor in that, and I loved it at the same time. So I like to think I lovingly made fun of it, but I got a lot of mileage out of it, and I still do.
Yeah, Lake Tahoe also residence to aging rock musician David Coverdale from Whitesnake.
Yes, that we have a lot of them. We have a lot of aging rock stars here.
Yeah, it's a good place to sort of unwind from the crazy lifestyle.
Yes. Down the street, there's a bar that Paul McCartney sneaks into and plays, when he's in town. It's just fascinating.
Have you ever seen him do it?
I have not been lucky enough to be in the bar when he comes in, but I would love to.
That would be an amazing experience. I mean, he still sounds great. And I don't know if you caught the Beatles documentary that's on, I think it's on Disney. But it's like 8 hours of sort of never before seen footage about making, I think they were making Let It Be, if I remember correctly. Like, now I'm probably
Uh-huh.
lying, but yeah, pretty amazing.
Yeah, so in that way, it's just this weird little place because it is so small. And then something like that happens and it feels so worldly and big city.
Yeah. Well, it's a great escapist notion too, like this idea of sort of kind of escaping into your own story, writing about small towns. I think there's so much charm there. Again, having traveled all over the country, I love these quirky little small towns that I've wound up in over the years.
And imagine if you ended up living in one after being in New York and LA. And I was actually born back east. So I was born in New Jersey. We lived in New York. So I feel like I still have that New York girl in me. So you can imagine, going in and you find these big wolf spiders and there's bears in our yard all the time. I post pictures about them for anyone who's fascinated by this crazy world I live in. I post pictures on Instagram and Facebook of the porcupine. My dog came home one day with 3 porcupine quills poking out her nose because she obviously put her nose where it didn't belong.
Sure.
Like these are things that happen here now that don't happen in LA.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've got 7 questions for you that I call the hot seat. These are don't think too much about them. Just use your gut, and we'll see where we go. First up is, how do you feel when you're staring at either a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen?
Happens all the time. I get so frustrated by myself because that means my outline is wrong and I've written myself into a corner and that's my fault and I have to go back and fix it and I often can't figure out how to fix it. So I usually get mad and frustrated.
So what do you do? So it sounds like you do you always write from an outline?
Always, because otherwise that happens every single time I sit down to write. So I often trick myself. I have a very detailed outline. And by the end of the day, I usually set goals, minor word count, because I used to have page count goals, but I would cheat. I'd hit return, return, return to get to the next page. And so I had to give that up. So now I have word count goals. And so I try to leave an outline. So I try to leave myself at the end of the day in the middle of a paragraph or the middle of a scene so that the next morning I'm not looking at a blank page.
Smart. A nice little hack for your a little goal hack for you.
Yeah.
All right. What lesson about writing or publishing do you feel like you learned the hard way?
Oh boy, patience. Really, you have to be so patient in this business. Nothing happens fast. Nothing is handed to you. Really, the only thing you can do for yourself is to write the best book you think you can write. There are no real hacks around that. And that takes so much patience. And that was something I don't have in spades. I did not stand in line for patience. I should have.
Yeah, I like to say that when God was handing out patience, I didn't get as many of them as, let's say, some other people in my life did. But all right, so you have to be patient. How about this one, number 3? What advice would you give an aspiring author?
To sit your butt in the chair and write, and then write some more, because this is not something you're born with. It's a skill you hone. It's not given to you, and you can't really learn it from reading something. You can learn it from reading widely. I believe you can learn a lot from that, but really you cannot learn to write in any other way but sitting down and writing. And the more you do it, the better you get.
It's like muscle memory or exercise, right?
And then the other thing I would say is don't give up. If you believe in yourself and this is what you want to do, and you work at honing your skill, then it will happen.
Were there times in your journey where you wanted to throw in the towel and give up?
Oh, every day, basically. This is a hard job, and I should have said that too. Like, this isn't something you decide on a whim. You're going to be poor a lot, and you have to work hard, and you have to be your own taskmaster. It's not an easy job, but it's the best job. I'm uniquely suited for almost nothing else. I can't. So if you feel that way, then don't give up.
Yeah, it is like it is being self-employed. For anyone who's run a business, being a writer is like being your own boss, and you don't have anyone else really who you're accountable to. I guess you're accountable to your agent, your publishers, and you have timelines you have to meet. But at the end of the day, it's you and your story.
Yeah, it really is, and it's all on you. Maybe you signed a contract and maybe you have a deadline, but if you don't produce a good book by that time, then your next deadline is not going to come. So it is all on you.
Yeah. So you're a very successful author. I mean, we were in the introduction, I was talking about the New York Times and USA Today, being best-selling authors on both of those lists. How do you celebrate your success?
I'm pretty grounded here at home. I have a very large family, and celebrating success is usually like, a pizza night, or a fun movie night. The traveling's kind of gone out the window in the last few years. So really, it's the quiet things, the little things I like to say.
Well, celebrating. I think celebrating is important. Anything, any kind of accomplishment, but no one says you have to do it in big ways. I love the idea of a pizza night.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Especially when I'm trying to cut carbs. Pizza. Yeah. It's wonderful.
I could live off pizza, but that's a whole nother story.
Do you have good pizza out in Lake Tahoe, or do you have to make your own?
Probably not as good as you have there in New York, but we make do.
You make do. All right, very good. I lived in outside of LA for a while, and that was my biggest complaint. I love the weather. The climate was great. Didn't like the traffic, but the pizza just wasn't there.
No, there's no pizza like New York. There's no bagels like New York.
I do. All right, here's a tough one. If you could choose one book as a mandatory read for anybody before they die, what would you choose and why?
Oh boy, that's a really hard one. I don't even know if I can answer that one. I think just reading in general is so important, and so many people don't do that anymore. I get it. There's streamers, and we watch TV, and we listen to the podcasts and all that. But I think reading is so important. It's fuel for brain fuel, and I think people skip over that. And if you don't like to read, then I always say get an audiobook. And I don't even care what you read. Don't read me if you don't want to, but read or listen to something that drives you and teaches you something and makes you excited about life. Yeah. And I don't think I'm really qualified to tell people what that might be.
Fair enough. With two of my kids, actually all three of them, I have triplets at home. They are 19, about to turn closer to 20 than 19, which freaks me out. Totally freaks me out.
At the same time. Yeah. That's
oof. What's that?
I don't recommend that to anybody.
Hey, look, I wouldn't change a thing, but I love the fact that they've all become readers.
That's awesome.
They all become readers. My daughter Gracie, she just bought like 3 books this weekend, is already done with one of them. My son wanted a gift card to our local small bookstore for Christmas, and he got it. And my other daughter is kind of rereading all the Harry Potter books right now. So
I love that they're reading. What is your first daughter reading?
Oh gosh, she was reading something about a band from the 60s, like a fictitious band from the 60s or 70s.
Eclectic interests, all three of them.
Yes, all three. Very, very eclectic. Very eclectic. But it makes me happy to see that.
When my kids were teenagers, they're in their 20s now. It was either you were team Twilight or you were team Harry Potter, and there was always a divide.
Always a divide.
I don't care. Just read and love it.
I haven't read any of the Twilight books. Again, not really targeted towards me, but
definitely not.
But I did read one of the kids, because the kids were all into Harry Potter, so I'm like, I should probably read these. And gosh, they're fantastic. Like they're, real page turners. But I do know that the 50 Shades books were Twilight fan fiction.
Yes.
Which I don't, again, not having not read or even seen the Twilight movies, I have no idea how those two things are related. But
well, two very different genres, right? Vampire and erotic novels. So I don't even know how that happened, to be honest.
I don't either. Maybe the vampires get frisky. I have no idea. I remember reading Anne Rice's books, her vampire books. I guess her vampires got a little frisky every now and then.
They did.
But hey, too. And vampires are people too. We all need love or lust or whatever you want to call it. All right. So this one is a little, could get a little dark, but we'll see how you do with it. Imagine that and you're very young. You've got a lot of runway ahead of you, but imagine you're in your final moments.
Mhm.
What are you going to be most proud about when looking back on your life, your career? What are you going to be most proud of in your final moments?
I think my family, that we created a family. My husband and I came from almost no family, each of us. And so one thing that we always wanted was to create a family, and that so that kids would have our kids would have a family the way neither him nor I do. So I think that's what I'm the most proud of ever, is that, we had three of our own. We took one in, so we raised four girls, and now we have grandkids. And we're all very close. We're all very connected. And I think that's what I'm most proud of.
Love it. Love it. Last up, question number 7. I call this the Brad Paisley question because it's kind of inspired by his song Letter to Me. But if you were able to write a letter to your younger self, you could pick the age, grammar school age, high school, whatever. What advice would you give your younger self? What would you put in that letter?
I would tell myself to be easier on myself, for sure. I was always my harshest critic, even now. And it's hard for me to think positive thoughts about myself and be encouraging. And it's much easier now, because with age comes this kind of almost acceptance of anything. I don't really know how to explain it better than that. But when you're 16, everything matters. And so I would like to just see that 16-year-old chill out. Things are going to get better.
Things are going to get better. Yeah. Having 3 kids who are 3 years away from being 16. Absolutely. I would love to be able, just because they won't listen to me. But
you're in the very thick of it. You got some rough years.
I know, but it's great. I love, what I love most is just seeing them become like responsible and good human beings,
Yeah.
That's what makes me smile every day. That and my dog. But
same dog, same.
There you go. Yeah. All right. So, as we record this, tomorrow is Tuesday, January 11th, and that is when The Family You Make will be available for sale. Where would you recommend, Jill, that people buy this?
Well, it'll be digital, print, and audio, so you can buy it wherever you buy your books. And it should be on the shelves at Target and Walmart. It's going to be at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google, Kobo, wherever you buy your books.
Wherever you buy books, including bookshop.org, I imagine. I always like to give them a little plug because we need to help those small independent bookstores.
Absolutely. And if you don't have a place in mind, you could go to jillshalvis.com and click on the book cover, and it will give you all of the links to all of those places.
There you go. There you go. Well, again, the book is The Family You Make. It's available tomorrow anywhere books are sold. Jill, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to chat with me. I loved our conversation.
Thank you.